Questions for reflection. Hezekiah, the king of Judah, was seriously ill. In our first reading, we have a portion of the full story, which is found in the 38th chapter of the book of the prophet Isaiah. As is sometimes the case, our readings from the Hebrew Scriptures, what Christians call the Old Testament, are sometimes only portions of the text. Also, they are sometimes set in a different sequence than they are in the text. Partly that's to assist us in understanding the applicable spiritual application for our own lives. But I strongly recommend to those listening and viewing, take the time to read the entire chapter. That will give you the literal interpretation of the passage, from which all interpretations should flow, according to Catholic teaching. The Catholic Catechism speaks of the senses of Scripture in paragraphs 115 to 119. Read it this week. It's truly helpful. We will consider what the church teaching calls the spiritual sense of these passages. The prophet Isaiah told the king he was going to die and to put his affairs in order. Wow! How would we respond to such a word from a messenger of the Lord? Listen to how Hezekiah responded, and I quote, Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and addressed this prayer to Yahweh. Ah, Yahweh, remember, I beg you, that I have behaved faithfully and with sincerity of heart in your presence and done what you regard as right. And Hezekiah shed many tears, end quote. The tenderness of the king's heart led him to sincere prayer. This is the lesson we can learn from the spiritual sense of these passages. When we face difficult news, even life and death news, turn to the Lord in earnest and heartfelt prayer. He always hears us. In this instance, he even extended the life of the king. What a wonderful God we serve. The responsorial psalm continues this theme. David reflects on his own mortality. He's in a tough place. He even feels perhaps abandoned by the Lord. But he does not give in to his feelings. Rather, he rebounds by appealing to the Lord and acting in faith. Hear the final words as he reflects on his trials and oppositions, and I quote, "The Lord is over them. They live, and everything in them lives by his Spirit. You will cure me, restore me to life," end quote. How do we respond to serious struggle? Faith is the victory. In the gospel appointed for today's Holy Mass, Jesus is confronted with the opposition of some of the Pharisees when they see his disciples picking heads of grain on the Sabbath because they were hungry. The Pharisees had become so rigid in their interpretation of resting on the Sabbath, refraining from work in order to honor the Lord, they had lost the heart of true faith and the meaning of the Sabbath rest. Jesus uses this encounter not only to rebuke them, perhaps hoping to help them turn away from their sin of judgmentalism, but to also disclose and underscore his own messianic identity. He is greater than the temple and Lord of the Sabbath. Their misguided legalism had deadened their hearts. They lost sight of the very purpose of the Sabbath rest and replaced mercy with hard-heartedness. A warning to all of us as well.